It's a challenging situation. Absolutely not going to disrespect anybody who's formed a venture fund and who's trying to execute that venture fund. That is a very hard job. And sometimes everybody says the entrepreneur's job is hard. Well, quite frankly, the investor's job is just as hard, but for different ways.
Chamath Palihapitiya, he's a VC, and he always talks about how the best talent in the world is outside of the US. And that it's such a disservice for us to not be exploring ways to find some of the greatest minds from India, from Europe, from Latin America. There's just so much talent that we're not able to realize because they don't know how to get to the US. There's not enough people in the US trying to find them and supply them with capital. There's language barriers, all of those hurdles really that you described earlier for how you're sourcing deals. It's a hurdle. Hello and welcome back to the Startup Shortcut. Today we have an exciting episode with my good friend Greg Bauer here. Greg Bauer is a co-founder and senior partner at ScaleUp Labs, an investment firm and venture builder focusing on AI-driven companies across advanced manufacturing, health tech, energy, and connected devices. Greg has co-founded 3 successful startups himself, including ventures that have IPO'd and been acquired. And he's actively involved in nurturing international tech companies through his ScaleUp Labs acceleration programs. On top of that, if that's not enough, he has served on multiple advisory boards and is deeply involved in philanthropic work, which we'll be able to discuss here today. Thank you so much for being here, Greg.
Michael, thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks. Really appreciate your having me.
Absolutely. A fellow tropical person as well. Right now you're in Colombia, right?
Yeah. Yes, I am in Colombia right now.
I got my palms. I'm trying to be like you right here. I got a little palm in the background. So
is that a real palm?
No, it is. It is. It's a small plant, but it's real.
Okay. Yeah. One's out the window are real. That's just the
not a green screen
right behind them.
On at ScaleUp Labs, because it is really unique. And I think it'd be interesting just to explain first and foremost a little bit more about what you're doing.
Okay. Well, thank you. ScaleUp Labs is an investment firm first and foremost, but we have a unique approach to how we approach investment. First of all, we are sourcing companies from underserved markets, Latin America, particularly Spanish-speaking Latin America, and the continent of Europe. These are markets that all have very skilled entrepreneurs doing some really exciting things, but they don't have access to the larger U.S. markets and to the U.S. capital markets. And we invest capital in the U.S. in very, very different ways than what they do in these markets, as I'm sure you know. Our investment business focuses principally on those markets, but we also do business originations ourselves. We are a business origination firm, and we do that via our venture builder or a venture studio that we call ScaleUp Studios. So we focus on companies that we find in these developing markets. We provide them a path to internationalization in the United States vis-a-vis our acceleration programs. We offer them a path into the studio if they're working on something that we think is really interesting and really investable to our communities. I'll talk about our communities in a second. And as opposed to pure originations in the studio, as most studios do, we do what we call catalytic combinations. So we look for an opportunity to take perhaps a company coming from Italy and a company coming from Chile, and maybe a company that we have originated or we have invested in the United States, and putting those companies together to take 1 + 1 and make it equal more than 2. That provides, we believe, a faster path to value creation and a more certain path to value creation. So that supports the entrepreneurs themselves, our investors, and the markets. So that's what we're doing at ScaleUp Labs in essence.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like a roll up for like private equity style models, but you're doing it at like the earliest stages by combining, like you said, the catalyst, like connecting them all together, like the European, the Chile company, putting them together so that there's more value being created.
You're essentially exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, what was the inspiration for this? Because I know that you've been in like VC for quite some time. You've had more conventional like firms in the past, or you've been involved like in startups yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So what was the inspiration what's the inspiration to, start sourcing startups from Latin America or all around the world? And like, how did you come up with this idea?
Well, I guess first and foremost, Michael, we're entrepreneurs ourselves. We are startup entrepreneurs. First, we're investors second. And as startup entrepreneurs, we look to see opportunities where markets or situations are being underserved or need to be served. So we saw that in Latin America first and in Europe second. And we felt that, and there is a unique investment opportunity in those markets. And there's a valuation arbitrage that's at play between these markets and the United States. So we first saw that valuation arbitrage. We second saw the needs in the traditional venture capital markets, particularly as we're in situations right now where IPOs are few and far between and exit valuations are lower, and decided to combine the sourcing in the international markets with the venture studio concept and the catalytic combination concept in order to take advantage of that valuation arbitrage and provide a differentiated investment opportunity for the market. You could, in fact, think of ScaleUp Labs and you could think of ScaleUp Studios as indeed startups themselves, because in a certain respect, they are startups themselves. So we're following. I mean, the short answer to your question, I could give you a much longer answer, but the short answer to your question is we're following our entrepreneurial noses, which is where our instincts take us to go.
I love that. I love that so much. Tell me a little bit about what you did previously before ScaleUp Labs. I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about just just other startups you've been involved with. Like, how did you end up here? Because obviously you didn't just stumble on it, right? Because entrepreneurial instinct, you've had so many other events previously in your life, other businesses you've been a part of that led you to this moment, that led you to this opportunity to see it in the way that you are. So tell me a little bit about the previous ventures that you've been involved with.
I'm not going to lie. I'm really not going to lie. I'm not going to tell you that we got here or I got here because I sat up when I was 20 years old. I decided strategically, I'm going to go do a scale-up studio and support international develop or international underserved markets. That would be a lie. It's a culmination of a lot of experiences. I had a short corporate career for a while after I got out of graduate school and served a little bit more of my corporate penance. I decided to join the startup community. I live in Boston, so consequently, it was a logical place to go. Fortunately, I had good experiences with the startups that I was part of founding prior to forming what we then called Spinnaker Venture Partners back in 2008 or something, I think was when we founded Spinnaker Ventures. Spinnaker Ventures was founded by a group of four of us that were startup entrepreneurs or are startup entrepreneurs in the Boston community. All had recent exits. All were looking for what's the next thing to do. And we decided to come together and do it serially. So that's what that was Spinnaker's formation and foundation. Spinnaker is one of three firms that came together in 2020 to form ScaleUp Labs, what's now called ScaleUp Labs. Along the course of our trajectory, we worked with at Spinnaker. We worked with a number of early stage companies. We had some successes with that. I've also got some companies that, quite honestly, are sitting in boxes in my garage. But every serial entrepreneur who's telling you the truth will tell you that they've had failures along the way. But in order to support our entrepreneurial habit, we decided that we needed to have some more assured elements of cash flow. So we started doing growth and innovation consulting for major corporations as a management consulting activity as part of Spinnaker Ventures. We consulted to the C-suite, primarily the CEO, for some very major corporations like Alcoa and PepsiCo and Clorox and Chiquita and on and on and on, which gave us a really interesting perspective on the corporate community. And what we learned in that time in the corporate community is that, believe it or not, corporations have a hard time innovating. And the reason they have a hard time innovating is because it's contrary to their risk profile. Corporations, unlike entrepreneurs, are very risk averse. We as entrepreneurs embrace risk because risk is what creates opportunity. Well, when you take away risk, you take away the principal driver that drives innovation. So consequently, we saw that the corporate community was hungry to access the entrepreneurial community to fill that innovation gap that they had to drive new sources of revenue, form new business lines, form new business units, and so forth. So that was part of the learning that we had in our, call it our investment journey. The second piece we had was that we live in and support the capital community. And the capital communities have a challenge. The capital communities understand risk, particularly the venture communities understand risk. But the really hard part with the capital communities is finding the really best deals to invest in. And in the United States, they're highly competitive. And then finding a path to exit for those opportunities. And the capital communities traditionally don't really talk to the corporate community because they don't understand each other. And so, but the corporate communities represent one of those potential paths for exit. And then, of course, we live in the innovation world, or call it the startup or the entrepreneurial world. And by accident, honestly, truly by accident, I stumbled in 2018 in this opportunity here in Latin America when I came to speak at a conference on leadership and entrepreneuring and innovation. And I saw just what a hunger there was for U.S. knowledge and experience, and just how really good and committed the entrepreneurs were. So consequently, that's when the idea for the acceleration platform was born, to serve the entrepreneurial community. So if you look at it and you say, we can access deals or opportunities from underserved markets to support the capital communities, and including ourselves, with deals that they don't traditionally get an opportunity to see, or don't understand how to access them because they're not embedded into these international markets, with to serve the innovation hunger that the corporate community has, which represent exits. If you think about those three communities, which are the three communities we serve, and you put yourself at the nexus, and you know how to speak all the languages and that those communities speak, because they speak different languages, even though they're all speaking principally English, but they all speak different languages within and amongst themselves. There's great opportunities born, and it's from that nexus at the middle. The idea for the studio was born, and the Catalytic combinations was born to provide a path for capital from the capital markets, a path for capital and market access to the international developing entrepreneurial markets, and to service the needs and the strategic intent of the corporate community.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like you're able to identify basically undervalued opportunities with incredible technologies that are built in Latin America or in Europe, bringing them to the US. I have a question about that here, I'll get to in a sec. But then what it really sounds like is your unique perspective of scaling in the US, and also being able to see exit opportunities because of this corporate background. That's sort of your, unique value proposition, really. It's the fact that you're able to bring all of those really complex components into one hub, and have a pretty high success rate, I imagine, right?
You're absolutely right. You nailed it. And it's a culmination of all of those experiences, and then putting them together through an entrepreneur's eyes that allows us to see this opportunity.
I love that. That's really
all of the co-founders have similar backgrounds to mine, and they're all serial entrepreneurs who believe in taking risk, who, quite frankly, we're contrarian investors. We don't follow the pack.
Which I think is becoming more and more necessary due to the competition in the US. You know what I mean? Like there's so much competition to find deals here. And people who just do carbon copy venture firms, I feel like it's becoming way more difficult. And I think that you see that in their inability to raise funds right now. Right. They're, especially 5 years ago when they raised, or however many years ago it was, and they raised their funds, capital was deployed. No exits are happening. No IPOs are really happening right now. They're like, oh no. And you have to get creative. So if they don't have the entrepreneur eye, maybe they can't pivot. They can't figure out how to get resourceful. And it's a pretty precarious situation for some VCs, right?
There's no question it's a challenging situation. I will not disrespect, and I'm not saying you are, absolutely not going to disrespect anybody who's formed a venture fund and who's trying to execute that venture fund. That is a very hard job. And sometimes everybody says the entrepreneur's job is hard. Well, quite frankly, the investor's job is just as hard, but for different ways. And
completely agree. Yeah.
And so none of these businesses, none of what we do, what you do, what I do, what my colleagues do, and I'm sure what some of your other guests do for a living is easy stuff, but it's fun.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And yeah, I don't want to take away from venture funds the difficulty of what it is. I'm more so saying the competitive landscapes requiring, people to find ways to be creative, like what you're doing. You have to be creative and innovative in order to thrive right now in this market, it seems.
You're right. I think the operative word there is innovation. Is innovative. It's an opportunity. How do you innovate within whatever it is you're trying to do?
Yeah.
How do you innovate to address whatever the situation is that you're currently facing? And
yeah, so I have a really important. I didn't mean to cut you off. I have a question I want to make sure I get back to. So, tell me a little bit about the value creation that you guys work on in your accelerator, like in ScaleUp Labs specifically, right? So, what do you when you're going to bring a technology from Latin America, right? Like, what are typically some of the first steps that you walk them through to help them get ingrained here in the U.S. and help them actually scale up? Tell me a little bit about that.
There's so much to that. The platforms that we execute that through are our ScaleUp Latam platform, which operates across Latin America, principally across Spanish-speaking Latin America, from Mexico to Chile and Argentina, and our ScaleUp Europe platform, which operates, as I said, principally across Central Europe. It doesn't operate in the very western part of Europe, but Central and Eastern Europe. The program, first of all, it's the selection process we use. We are very selective in the companies that we offer an opportunity to participate. We make sure that those companies, in fact, A, are solving an international problem, we believe have the potential to attract international capital, and C, and most importantly, the management team and their current investors have the will, the desire, fortitude, and really truly want to make an international expansion. I didn't say international move, I said international expansion, because we don't seek to cause the companies to relocate from wherever they happen to be operating today, but we do ask them to form a U.S. corporation to support that international expansion. Then we put them through a 16-week formal acceleration process that is done entirely with a U.S. internationalization plan in mind. So the course of that 16 weeks, the syllabus for that 16 weeks, are all things that an international founder needs to know and understand in order to both expand their business into markets like the United States or similar markets, and to attract capital from the United States. Because, as I said, capital and the way it's deployed in the United States is dramatically different than how it's deployed in most other parts of the world. And that program is all done with US-based experts, US-based speakers, US-based trainers, US-based mentors and coaches. So, but they're all people that have an international understanding of the markets wherever they're going to be supporting their company. So a mentor that we assign for an Italian company, for example, would be someone who understands the Italian culture, but understands it in the context of the US culture and similar markets. Same for if we pick someone from Colombia, they'll most likely have a mentor who understands at least Latin American culture, if not specifically Colombian culture, because there are differences, as you know, even within countries within a specific region. So a great deal of what they're learning is not just the mechanics of how do we invest, how do you find market partners, how do you identify beachhead markets, those kinds of things, but also understanding how to develop bicultural fluency or tricultural fluency or whatever is required, because those differences in culture very often can make a huge difference in the success or failure of a particular venture as it strives to do this. So this is one of the reasons that I spend as much time in the field. I'm in, as you mentioned before, I'm in Colombia right now, is I spend as much time in the field because if we don't go live it, how do we help other people to understand it? So it's part of our operating philosophy and our model that we use.
That's incredible. I'm honestly just so baffled with how many different components go into making sure that like the deals that you do go right. Because you have to source, you have to make sure they're willing to expand internet. Like there's just so much that goes into every single deal. My question for you is, how do you find these deals? Like what's your sourcing? Like do you boots on the ground actually do this? Like what do you feel like has been the best way for you to find the right deals for ScaleUp Labs, like in recent history?
Therein lies the challenge that every investor has, and probably every accelerator operator has that's operating over such a big territory, is how do you find the deals? How do you source the deals? And how do you source the very, very best deals that you can find? And it's really no different whether we're sourcing deals in Latin America or Europe, or whether we're sourcing deals in the United States. It's still how do you find those deals? And if I told you, I'd have to kill you. No, I'm kidding. You know, but it's like anything, you've got to kiss a lot of frogs to find a prince. And so we source those deals through social media. We source those deals through word of mouth. We source those deals through working with organizations, government and private organizations in the markets that we're serving. We source those deals with working through corporations. We have partners, co-founders that are in market, that are in Latin America and in Europe. We have a venture fund that is dedicated to Latin America. It's domiciled in Santiago, Chile, which is called the ScaleUp Latam Venture Fund. We're not very magic, but everything is scale up. But we have our sourcing that comes through that venture fund. It's just a lot of things that we do. We speak at a number of conferences. I do podcasts, or we do podcasts like we're doing with you today. I can thank you. Those are all the various ways that we source deals. There isn't any shortcut. There isn't any math. And then the companies that apply go through an extensive application and verification process and validation process. And even then, we don't always guess right. We don't always do it right. But one thing we do know is by the time that those companies have been through that 16-week program, and we work with them as closely as we do over the course of that 16-week program, we have done a level of due diligence on those companies that is impossible in a traditional venture investing environment. In a traditional venture investing environment, it is the diligence process is expensive and long and imperfect. And not that our process is perfect, but our process is very different because of the fact that we know these people personally. We know their families. We know their co-founders. We know their investors. We know their customers. We know where their technology is great and where they need some support and some help. We know these things intimately by the time we're done. So that's really helpful to us.
Yeah, a lot of respect for the amount of work that goes into finding deals. And I think sometimes the perception from founders, like we talk to a lot of founders at my company, about 130 to 150 a week right now. That are looking to raise money. Just like that's a lot of people that are trying to raise money at any given time, right? And sometimes, the thing that's really surprising is some founders really think that, the VC job is just like really straightforward and simple because they just are writing checks and they just have to pick from the best. But I think there's so much that goes into making the right decisions because you have a fiduciary responsibility for the LPs, of course. You have to like have a reputation. You're looking for the best. And I think that there's so much more that goes into finding and curating the right deals that, founders, like you said, VC's hard, startups hard, different hard, but equally difficult paths for people to go down. You know what I mean?
It's really very much the same job from different sides of the desk.
It's a good way of looking at that.
It really is. I mean, I've lived and do live on both sides of the desk, and they're not that different. And of course, finding the companies and making an investment in the companies, regardless whether you're doing the investment in kind as we do through the acceleration programs, or whether it's being done with capital, whatever it is, that's only the beginning of the relationship with the customer, with the company you're investing in. Then comes the really hard part, and the really hard part is helping to create value to that investment, because that is our responsibility as investors, is to help create value to the benefit of the LPs, to the benefit of the founders, and to obviously our own benefit.
Yeah.
So
makes a lot of sense.
The hard part.
not only writing the check, but helping them like actually become something bigger that's successful. Absolutely. Chamath Palihapitiya. I'm not sure if I just butchered his name. I love him and his perspective. He has a podcast called All In. He's a VC, and he always talks about how the best talent in the world is outside of the U.S. and that it's such a disservice for us to not be exploring ways to find some of the greatest minds from India, from Europe, from Latin America. There's just so much talent that we're not able to realize because they don't know how to get to the US. There's not enough people in the US trying to find them and supply them with capital. There's language barriers, all of those hurdles really that you described earlier for how you're sourcing deals. It's a hurdle, right? That you have to cross in order to find those individuals. So I guess my question is like, what would you recommend now from the founder's point of view? What should the founder, if they're listening to this right now, they're an international founder, they're in Europe, they're in Latin America, wherever it may be.
They shouldn't be listening to this. They should be building value in their businesses.
Okay, that's amazing.
They can do this. They can do this in the evening before they go to sleep.
That's when they're allowed to do this. It's only when they're about to fall asleep. But yeah, I mean, from a founder's perspective, how should they be looking at breaking into the US? You know what I mean? Because I know, like, for example, we talk to a lot of founders that are international and they're not exactly sure if US investors have an appetite for them, or like they think that scaling a business in the US is really tricky. They don't understand the market, whatever it may be. So let's maybe go down that path a little bit, talk about what sort of advice you would recommend for maybe founders that are looking to break into the US market.
Let me try to make it really as brief as I possibly can. You're right. Breaking into the US is hard. Breaking into the US is really scary because the US isn't one market. The US is many different markets. And they speak this funny language, and their culture is very different. And they're very, for the most part, as Americans, we're very direct, particularly the Europeans and the Latin Americans in many cases are very indirect in their approach of things. So it's understanding that. It's understanding how the US capital markets work because they work very differently than the European and Latin America. I alluded to that before, but it's a fact. Understanding that is really important. But the two biggest things that we run into, one is you can't sit in Buenos Aires, you can't sit in Amsterdam, you can't sit in Warsaw and break into the US by internet. Well, maybe you can if you're a hacker, but you can't break into the US markets if you're sitting there. You have to actually go and do it, much the same way that we go into the markets where we are working and actually do it and actually put our time and our bodies where our founders are. That's important. So you can't do it by remote control. And you also can't do it by casually. In other words, the US is a market where time is of the essence. And if someone sends you an email message, you can't say mañana, mañana. You got to respond to that email message as I know, within that day, or certainly no later than the next day, or the opportunity is going to disappear. So consequently, it is understanding that element of time is super important. I'll give you an interesting anecdotal story. You'll like this. This comes down to my chicken and pig analogy. I'll often say to a founder, particularly a newer founder, are you a chicken or are you a pig? And of course, they don't know how to answer that question most of the time. And they're not supposed to be able to answer that question most of the time. But I say it comes down to your level of commitment. If you look at your breakfast of eggs and bacon, the chicken is involved, but the pig is fully committed. So are you a chicken or are you a pig? And you'll never be able to break into the US markets or probably any international market if you're not a pig. So here's an interesting anecdotal story. From our last cohort in Europe, the one in 2023, one of the founders is, I won't say his name and I won't say the name of his company, but he's doing something really interesting in the health tech arena. He decided he was going to come to the United States and raise capital. And he was almost out of capital in Italy. And in most cases, in those startups, they've founded those startups by grants, not by real capital. So he decided he's going to come to the United States and raise capital. So it was last summer. That's about exactly a year ago. One of my partners in Boston got a phone call. And the phone call in the evening. And he answers his phone. The guy says, is this Mr. So-and-so again? I won't mention his name. And he said, yes. And he says, well, this is Officer so-and-so from the Chicago Transit Police. And he said, well, officer, how can I help you? And he said, we have a gentleman here who's been sleeping in the train station for the last 3 nights. And he said he's not doing anything wrong and he's completely clean and so on and so forth. But he says that he knows you and he says he's one of your founders. Can you vouch for him? And so I said, please put him on the phone. And the two of them talk and my partner said, what are you doing? And he said, I decided that I had come into the United States and I'm not leaving until I have raised the capital that I'm here to raise. So I'm traveling from Boston to Chicago to Silicon Valley to Austin, Texas, to Golden Triangle, to New York, to Boston. I'm just traveling. And he said, we don't have enough money left to really afford hotels everywhere. So I'm just sleeping here on the train station. And now that is a story of a founder who is truly a pig. But it takes that kind of commitment. Commitment is probably the word.
Makes sense. There's no other option. It really seems like burned the boats to take the island, right? That quote. If you've ever heard that,
that's well put. Yeah,
I like that. That's a pretty incredible story there, and I've never heard the chicken and the pig. I'm probably going to use that in the future. So thank you for that, Craig.
No attribution required. I don't remember where I got it. I probably lifted it from somebody else too.
I have a couple quick questions then, because I'm curious when the right time is for Latin American founders or international founders to try and break into the US. You know what I mean? So what's the certain amount of traction they should have? Is it when they have an MVP and they think the US market's better suited because it's bigger? Is it a certain revenue point? What do you feel is the right time for them to try and make that jump from your perspective?
Well, again, from our perspective, and I think everybody's different and every situation is different. And we've seen founders that have come not via investments we've made, but we've seen founders that have come to the United States at a very early stage and become unicorns here in Latin America. And by conventional standards, you just said, you're coming to the United States too early. But they came to the United States with solving the right problem, with the right value proposition, with the right attitude, with the right place. And yes, they got lucky. And luck is a big part of all of this. But if you want to take it and try to put it codify it, it would be, we tend to look for companies that are fully constituted in their home countries, have management teams that are full-time and fully committed, are well beyond the idea stage or the MVP stage. We tend to look at startups in 3 stages: the idea stage, the business concept stage, that's where MVP typically lives, and in the business stage. In the business stage, they have revenues. They probably have had some level of investment, whether it's friends and families or maybe even some small seed rounds from angels, or maybe even some institutional rounds, some very early stage institutional rounds in their home markets, which are traditionally smaller than they are in the U.S. Have customers, have recurring revenue, solving international problem, and have the desire to do it. When all of those things come together, then that's probably the way that we tend to manage or look at deal flow. Those are the right times for companies to consider coming to the U.S. But then they need a path to internationalization, and part of what we do between the acceleration platforms and fund and the studio is to provide them that path to internationalization when they're ready. For example, our 2024 cohort has just graduated at the end of June, and they're all coming to Boston during the week of September 9th to 13th for their demo day and to really start that process of the internationalization. It also happens to be the week of Boston Startup Week. So there's a lot going on that week in Boston.
Yeah, that'll be a good time for them to be there. That's a real American experience too, I imagine. Everyone just flooding. That's exciting. So I'm curious, do you feel that based on the country even that these founders are in, that even has to do with their market opportunity? If they're trying to build technology, they're probably thinking locally or regionally, and then they see the US as just such a big, scary beast. You know what I mean? I feel like that's at least for most. What's that?
It's a big monolith. It is scary.
Yeah.
Very scary beast.
Yeah. So what do you think if someone breaks into the US, right? They're not fortunate enough yet to work with ScaleUp. They're coming here all by themselves. What do you feel like, the plan of attack is per se. What's like your piece of advice to someone who's trying to break into the US? You know what I mean? And you're like, step number one, you should try and do this. Or step two, you do this. Like what would be your process for them to start to get a grip on their market and to, be able to start to scale?
There's a few things to unpack in what you said, Michael. The first thing is in their home countries. It's interesting. We're finding some really interesting companies solving some really interesting problems in innovative ways in places that you would never expect. Example being, we're seeing Venezuela just had a very messy election, and it's a very messy environment. But we're seeing companies coming out of Venezuela you would never expect. We're seeing companies coming out of Venezuela that are super high quality companies. They're solving a problem that may be ready for internationalization to the US. I use that as an example because it's a stark example. You can say, well, I expect to see somebody come out of Germany or out of Holland or out of someplace like that. Venezuela is not a place you'd expect that. But they are. That's first. Secondly, and this is the other part to unpack, is many of these founders are solving problems that go beyond the countries or the markets that they come from. This is going to sound weird. They don't think they have permission. It's a cultural thing. We as Americans are irreverent. We act first and ask for permission second. And in these other markets, many people ask for permission first, and they don't think they have permission. So secondly, you got to find somebody to give you permission. And whether it's ScaleUp or whether it's Y Combinator or whether it's, Generator or many other quality programs, that helps to give you that permission. And the third part is do your homework. They need to do their homework. They need to understand the personas of their buyers, not in the context of the buyers in their home market, the personas of the buyers in their potential buyers in their new market. And interestingly enough, the personas of the buyers in New York are probably very different than the personas of the buyers in Houston or the personas of the buyers in Seattle, where you're from. They're all regional. Understand that. So understand the personas of the buyer and then find a path to entry. And what I mean by a path of entry is find a beachhead. I think you understand the concept of beachhead. I hope the listeners do. But find a beachhead that is the right beachhead to land. Just because you're from Latin America doesn't mean that Miami is the best beachhead to enter into. And I'm sorry to my friends in Miami, which is the unofficial capital of Latin America, but Miami may not be the best beachhead to enter into. If you're doing something in advanced automation or advanced manufacturing, you probably want to find a beachhead in Chicago or Cleveland or someplace in the Rust Belt, Milwaukee. You probably don't want to find a beachhead in Miami, or you don't want to find a beachhead in New York. But if you're doing something in financial services, well, then probably New York or Boston beachheads, because they're both financial services centers and hubs. So find a beachhead and then plan your entry in the right spot. And as you find that beachhead, as you identify that beachhead, a beachhead partner, whether it's an initial customer fits beachhead characteristics of a customer, an initial partnership, find a path to entry, and then make your commitment to enter.
So much there. I just want to recap that. That was a masterclass, I think, you just threw out, right? That was huge. I think that you are so right about asking for permission. I never thought about it that way, but Latin American international companies in general, they're not sure when to do it. And I think you hit it on the head. It's mainly because they are looking for someone to tell them it's okay to go. And I've never thought about it like that, but I was running through conversations when you were talking about that in my head with some founders we've spoken to, and even founders that we've worked with, in Latin America. When we mention their goal is to go into the US, they actually sound ready, and we have to be the ones to mention to try it. They're almost waiting for it. It's very interesting that you put it that way. And you're totally right. The American way, I feel like culturally, we just do and then ask for forgiveness. You're exactly right. So I think that was a revolutionary moment for me personally. And then you also hit the nail on the head with this beachhead analogy that you gave, because I actually completely agree. A lot of people go to Miami. A lot of people would go to California just due to maybe language barriers, or maybe just due to the fact that they think that that's where they should be because culturally they might be more accepted. But you're totally right. They should go where the business is best suited and the business is going to be best set. And exactly as you mentioned, having sort of someone that they have as a partner, someone who, whether it's ScaleUp or whether it's just an actual channel partner or someone that they know that's in the industry that they can talk to about cultural norms and kind of better understand what's going on. Because when you come to a new country, you have to learn. What's better than to talk to people that are in the industry doing things where you're trying to do it. That was incredible what you just said right there. That was really helpful for me. Yeah, that was great. So a couple of things to end on here. I always like to end on two questions, just because of the industry that we're in right now. We're in a very exciting time in general. I can't believe it's already been 45 minutes of us talking, by the way. It's pretty crazy. This is going fast. Right. So right now, we're in a very interesting time in history where it's basically like an internet moment, right? But AI, right? AI is sort of just breaking so many beliefs in terms of what's possible. It's letting people scale companies faster. So many exciting things and yet scary things for people. You know what I mean? And I don't think there's been something so controversial since the internet, right? And I'm curious, from your perspective, you obviously are deep into this space. You see a lot of exciting opportunities. What do you have any big bets on AI? Do you have any contrarian views? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the subject in general.
We're AI first in terms of what we're doing, particularly currently. And we're fortunate enough to have a couple of our partners that are very, very deep AI experts. And so consequently, in fact, doing AI companies 10 years ago, before people even really understood AI in terms of the current versions of generative AI and quantum computing and all of the things that are happening. A couple things that are particularly advice to founders. Well, one thing is advice to founders is AI is moving so fast that it changes the velocity at which you have to think and plan and execute your business. Because what is innovative and novel in terms of a business today, next week may be a standard offering from ChatGPT or Gemini or one of the other platforms. It's changing the speed at which we move, in which things move so rapidly and is developing so rapidly. So plan that into your business planning, your actions, and how you're moving. What it can do is so powerful, but what it can do to you, and I don't mean in the way that AI is going to kill us all. I mean, but AI may kill your business if you don't understand how to maneuver that is important. One of my partners said something. We were having a conversation earlier this week. It was really cool. We were working in our manufacturing automation space, or advanced factory automation, or advanced automation, or advanced manufacturing, or whatever terminology. I think we tend to call it advanced manufacturing, which is one of the sectors that we like and that we work in. And we were talking about a specific situation that we had run into that was solving a problem. And my partner, who is very intelligent and very innovative, you actually know him or have met him, is particularly innovative, he said, my mind has gotten changed entirely about AI in the last 6 months or 8 months. And it's in terms of how do we approach problems. It used to be, particularly in areas where AI is really, really powerful, and that's places where you have massive amounts of data, and that data is largely unstructured data. If you could harness that unstructured data, you can solve business problems or get new insights in how to solve business problems that you'd never have had before. But in the past, what would we do? We would spend a lot of time, or anybody would spend a lot of time studying the data and looking for what the best way to approach it and how should that data be parsed and structured and so forth, and where does the data reside and what form is the data in, and getting it all and cleaning the data and all that stuff that we do as technicians or engineers. But he said, that was the way we solved problems before, and then we would build a solution. Today, with the way that generative AI is working, don't worry about structuring the data. Just configure the AI and throw it at the data. It will figure it out. It will figure it out, and it will come back and it will tell you, if you know what to listen, if you know how to listen for, it will tell you how the data should be structured and give you the path to the solution that you're building all by itself. It's completely turned upside down. I know this is a little technical, but it's completely turned upside down the way we're problem solving.
Well, think about Sam Altman. I mean, he literally said he doesn't care about profitability. He doesn't care about a path to profitability. He said he's just going to build the AI so well so that it'll tell him how to make it profitable.
Well, that's effectively what's happening. Yeah, he's right.
It's unbelievable. You're nailing it. It's like AI is really just changing the way that we like look at a problem. I think fundamentally, it's changing the way that we not only look at it but how we approach it, because it's able to do so much thinking for us and give us such a better output from like day one. You know what I mean?
I wouldn't say AI is thinking for us. I don't think we're there. And I don't know that we're going to get there anytime soon. But what AI is doing is AI is processing for us much faster so we can think. It's getting more and more and more powerful. And quantum computing is going to take it to yet another dimension. But it's not thinking for us. It's helping us to do the mundane tasks without having to configure it to do those mundane tasks, so that we can think for ourselves and spend far less time doing and far more time thinking.
It's very exciting. And anyone that's listening to this, I actually recommend this to all of our team members, employees, anyone that I talk to. It's really surprising to me how few people actually use and try and use AI intentionally, and to like break old habits of like even using Google or like just little things for looking for ways to use it in the day-to-day basis. Because I think that the more you adopt it now, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to see opportunities, and from the entrepreneur perspective, be able to take advantage of the next, opportunities that are coming inevitably with everything that's going on there. So last question for you. I always like to end on, final piece of advice, like the most valuable piece of advice that you could give a startup founder right now that is, let's say specifically an international founder that is considering moving to the US. What would you, in a one-on-one honest conversation with them, try and tell them? I know that that's a hard loaded question with so many different variables, but
yeah, you're right. It's a loaded question with a lot of variables. And if you put it in the context, what's the greatest piece of advice I would give to a startup entrepreneur, particularly a new startup entrepreneur? It's different than it's broader than the context of what's the piece of advice I would give to an international entrepreneur who's looking to expand their business to the United States. But to someone who's looking to expand their business, an international entrepreneur looking to expand their business to the United States, to the US or any other international market, I would say fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a wild ride. It's going to take you through some really unexpected places, but it's going to take you to some really exciting places too. And keep your mind open and be willing to make mistakes, because you will, and to learn from those mistakes versus letting those mistakes defeat you. One of the things that other cultures do is they punish failure. So consequently, they find that, well, if I came and I tried to have my business enter Miami and it didn't work, and if I'd really known what I was doing, I'd have taken my business to Kansas City or Denver. Well, I failed. I'm going to go home and hide. That's not how we look at failure in the United States. As a matter of fact, there are investment firms that won't invest in you if you haven't failed once or twice because you haven't learned. So consequently, look at failure not as something you strive for, but something that's going to happen to you. And failures don't have to be fatal and they don't have to be big, but they're going to happen, and don't let them stop you. Use those as a learning experience, because your failures are often better teachers than your successes. That's my advice to an international startup entrepreneur who's looking to internationalize.
So powerful, Greg. Well, I don't think I can even end with anything else. That was the final note. So I'll let that be the last words that were said here, because I can't top it. I think that is perfect. Don't let me ruin it. I think that was exactly what we needed to wrap up the episode today. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the episode so far. This was an absolute masterclass today here with Greg. I'm going to be putting his links down below so you can get in contact with him. You can reach out and talk about ScaleUp Labs. You can connect with him on LinkedIn and see if there's anything that can be done between you and whatever founders out there are listening to this. So, Greg, thank you so much again for your time today. I'm excited for continuing the conversation, and this was really helpful. Thank you.
Well, Michael, thank you for inviting me. It's been a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. You're always fun to talk to. We haven't done a podcast together before, but I can say as a podcast host, you made it a lot of fun. Not all of them do, but to the founders that are out there that are going to be listening to the podcast, what you've set off to do is the most exciting thing you're ever going to do in your lives. There's only one thing I can think of that's any harder, and that's raising kids. And because neither startups nor kids come with directions. So enjoy the experience. And I wish you all the very, very best and of luck and good fortunes. So thank you.
Great.